Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, we'll be talking about the Democratic Party's path to 270 electoral votes in the 2028 presidential election. Now, obviously, we do not know who the Democratic nominee will be. We don't know who the Republican nominee will be. We don't know anything about the circumstances of the election because it is still nearly 4 years away. But with that being said, it's never too early to start thinking about this map, and I like to think about it from the perspective of the party out of power. The Democrats lost this map last November. What can they do to win it back, to gain back, to get to 270? And I did this for the Republicans in 2021. And what I said essentially was that the best way for Republicans to get back to their 270 mark was to win back the Sun Belt and cut into the Rust Belt by one state, whether that be Michigan, Wisconsin, or Pennsylvania. Donald Trump not only did that, but he won the whole Rust Belt anyways. So often these are not predictions that necessarily come true in a literal sense, but they do kind of show the path and they show how it's possible. So let's start by filling out the states that we know Democrats are extremely likely to win, barring something crazy happening come 2024. These are just going to be the safe states. I'm going to put New Jersey on here for now because I still think Democrats are broadly favored to win here, even though it's going to be a closer state from here on out. I'm also going to fill out the states that I think are broadly going to be pretty Republican leaning. So we're not really going to talk about too many of these states because maybe in a crazy scenario something would happen, but realistically not much is going to happen. I'm going to put Texas in this category as well, just because I think that given 2024's trends, Texas looks to suddenly be very bad for Democrats once again. And I'm also going to give Democrat states like Colorado, New Mexico, New Hampshire, and Virginia, as well as Minnesota. So essentially the Kamala Harris states. And I'm going to give Republicans now to kind of finish this off. Nebraska's first district, Alaska, Florida should have always been on there. I'm kind of not used to putting it in the safe red column. It's certainly going to be there from the time from here on out. And so as you can see, we're kind of looking at the same electoral map that we looked at in 2024, which was there is 7 really big swing states. Maybe on a really good night, Democrats could cut into the red states, or a Republican could cut into a blue state. Reminder: Donald Trump only lost Minnesota by 4, so 4 points away from that happening. I think Kamala Harris's closest state of these was definitely not as close. I think it might have been either Ohio or Alaska, or potentially Nebraska's first district. But as you can see, the map is pretty stable. And now we kind of get into an exercise of these 7 states, what is the easiest path for Democrats? And now, if you go to the 2024 election, the easiest path for Democrats for Kamala Harris was simple. It was just winning the Rust Belt. She lost these 4 Sun Belt states by more than she lost any of the Rust Belt states by, and that would have been her 270 margin. She would have just won the Rust Belt. Now, the issue for Democrats in the Rust Belt going forward is that I think that they actually didn't do all that poorly here in 2024, and that there's still plenty of room for the bottom to fall out, especially in states like Wisconsin, where Kamala Harris held her own in these rural areas, right? We saw Kamala Harris crash and burn in rural Texas, especially with Hispanic voters. She crashed and burned with working class Hispanic voters in Nevada. She did very poorly essentially everywhere in Arizona, but especially in rural Arizona. We saw massive turnout spikes for Trump in these rural parts of the state. We didn't really get that in Wisconsin. Kamala Harris only lost Wisconsin by like 0.8 or 0.9%, because even though she did a bit worse than Biden in Milwaukee and Madison, a little bit worse than him in the Driftless, she did a bit better than he did in the WOW counties, and she held her own, to an extent in the rural areas. So I think Wisconsin, even though it was the closest, probably not the best for Democrats. I think we actually would go to the Sun Belt to really get our best look. And I think Georgia is the state that I'm most confident of these 7 that Democrats would win in 2028. Georgia only voted for Trump by 2%. Democrats had okay black turnout. It wasn't great. It really, I think, should have been better, just based on what Democrats were expecting. And so given that, and given the fact that it was still a 2-point margin, we still saw some pretty good trends for Democrats in the Atlanta suburbs. Georgia's state where I think Democrats should still be pretty excited about their trajectory. Again, in 2020, people often put Arizona, Texas, and Georgia kind of in the same bucket of left-trending Sunbelt states that are going to be blue by 2030. I think of those 3, the only one still even remotely on track for that is Georgia. And again, I don't think Georgia's going to be solid by 2030, but I think by 2028, it'll probably be still in that toss-up to lean blue maybe category if Democrats play their cards right. And a lot of it comes down to how well Jon Ossoff does in 2026, so stay tuned for that. But I think that given the fact that Harris only lost Georgia by 2, certainly reasonable to put that in the column for her. And then I think, interestingly enough, you might be tempted to go to North Carolina. I think you go to Pennsylvania here for the Democratic Party. Again, Kamala Harris lost Pennsylvania by around 1.5%. It was close. It wasn't like absurdly close. It wasn't as close as it was in 2016, which is certainly a problem. It was actually even not as close as it was in 2020, which, again, isn't a good sign for Kamala Harris. Or really for the Democrats going forward. But there's still a clear path here, and Kamala Harris could have actually won Pennsylvania had she just done better in the Philly suburbs. Again, she did reasonably well in Pittsburgh and the Pittsburgh-Collar counties. She did not do well in rural Pennsylvania. She did not do well in Scranton and a lot of the working-class cities that Democrats have been losing ground in over the past decade and a half. But if we talk about the reason she lost Pennsylvania, it came entirely in Philadelphia. She didn't get the turnout she needed in Philadelphia, and she did not get the number she needed in the Philadelphia suburbs, even though the turnout there was broadly okay. That reverses, and you're looking at a bluer Pennsylvania in 2024, and that's the path for Democrats in 2028. And to be clear, and this also goes for Georgia, I'm not saying Pennsylvania is going to flip back. I actually don't think that right now that is the most probable outcome. What I do think at this point is that the Republican Party is favored, especially in Pennsylvania, to win it in 2028. But it's March of Trump's first term. And again, if you think back to March of 2021, Democrats were a lot more optimistic than they ended up being by 2024. So these things can change, and I think that we kind of have to work under the assumption that things will change if Democrats are going to be looking at a winning map in 2028. So from here it gets interesting. I think you can go one of two routes. You can either go Michigan or North Carolina. Now, Wisconsin, again, was the closest state of these 7 in 2020 or 2024. I'm not going to put it ahead of Michigan and North Carolina because, again, there's still more room for the bottom to fall out. Now, Kamala Harris lost Michigan by around, I think, 0.8 or 0.9% more than she lost Wisconsin by. Or actually, I think 0.6%. I'm getting confused with Pennsylvania, right? And that was despite the fact that I think Kamala Harris put up the worst performance. And I don't say this to blame it entirely on Kamala Harris because certainly there were factors outside of her control, but her performance in Michigan was very, very bad. Not only did we see her lose ground in Grand Rapids and in the Detroit suburbs, which are areas that have been trending towards Democrats reliably for the past 6 to 8 years, we also saw Kamala Harris not get anywhere close to the turnout she needed in Detroit. Wayne County was very bad for Democrats. I think a lot of that was because of the Gaza issue, which did end up hurting Democrats. And Kamala Harris, it wasn't enough to cost her the state, but it cost her tens of thousands of votes in Wayne County, most likely given the swings in Dearborn, which is, I think, the most Muslim town in the U.S., or at least one of the most. It's definitely the biggest town with a huge Muslim influence. And so what we've seen, I think almost guaranteed, is that Michigan is going to be fascinating to watch in 2026 if these voters come back to Democrats, if there's a way Democrats can offset that by winning back the suburbs like they did in 2020 and 2022. I don't know. It'll be, certainly interesting to watch. But here's the thing I will say. It's that Democrats were banking on Michigan to be the bluest of these Rust Belt states. I certainly think that it could go any direction in 2020 state. So I'm not going to put Michigan there. I'm going to go with North Carolina just because the trends, again, had you told me Kamala Harris would lose Michigan by 1.5, she'd lose Pennsylvania by more than Clinton did in 2016, that she would lose Arizona by 5, right? I would have guessed she'd be losing North Carolina by 6 or 7. She only lost it by around 3.5. She lost it actually by a bit less than Hillary Clinton in 2016 did. So unlike in states like Michigan or Pennsylvania or Nevada or Arizona, we saw between 2016 and 2024, North Carolina did get bluer. And so that is an encouraging sign for Democrats. And I think the big thing here, and again, I want to see how Democrats do in 2026. Like want to see how they do in Georgia in 2026. But my most important thing when I think about North Carolina is population growth. North Carolina is one of the fastest growing states in the country. And a really interesting thing to think about is that this electorate could be very different in 2028 than it was in 2024. The same with the 2024 electorate is very different from the electorate in 2020. And I think that of the areas in North Carolina that are going to see the most growth, it's Democratic areas. It's areas outside of Charlotte, outside of I'm blanking on it's outside of Raleigh and outside of Winston-Salem, excuse me. And so those are areas where Democrats saw minimal gains in 2024. Again, if you look at the swing map of North Carolina, which I now wish I had pulled up to reference this, but again, you can look it up just to make sure you don't take my word for it, is that we saw Democrats gain in the suburbs across these cities in North Carolina. And that wasn't even the case in states like Pennsylvania. It wasn't the case in states like Michigan. It wasn't the case in states like Wisconsin, certainly not in states like Nevada and Arizona. But in North Carolina, Democrats had some good signs. And that was offset because Democratic turnout in the cities wasn't that great. And Kamala Harris did lose significant margins in the state's northeast, which has a region with many black voters, especially in rural areas. And so that'll be a problem for Democrats, but I think it's one that will long-term potentially be offset by gains in the suburbs, just because of the pure math issue where you have, like, quite simply, there are more voters in the suburbs that are, voting for Democrats than there are voters, moving out of the northeastern part of the state or switching their votes to Republicans. Another issue is, unfortunately, a lot of these areas Democrats have been banking on in North Carolina, in that northeastern part of the state, right about here, are very old, and you actually have population just decline overall because people are passing away, because this is one of the oldest parts of the country just by age. So with that being said, I think that's the clearest path for Democrats, whether it be Kamala Harris, whether it be someone else, which I'm excited to see, by the way. I think it'll be a fascinating primary. It'll be the first truly competitive primary we've had in 8 years, which will be really interesting to see. But I think this is the path, and it'll vary by candidate. Maybe if Democrats were to run Gretchen Whitmer, Michigan would be on the map, and we'd take North Carolina out. But I think this is based on what we know from 2024 and what we can kind of sort of extrapolate. This is what I would say. So thanks for watching. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you all next time.